On the night of September 22, 2018, two men stood near the stairwell of a Motel 6, running their mouths and throwing signs at a black Acura with tinted windows. They walked up to their room and came back down still talking. But the back and forth ended with a semi-automatic coming up out of a car door and the whole lot lighting up. One of the men caught 2 rounds with one tearing through his elbow. The other hit him in the chest, punching clean through and collapsed his lung. Surprisingly, he lived and the Acura was already gone, sliding back out onto the road. And inside that car sat a 28-year-old who would soon be standing in a Cook County courtroom under a $1.25 million bond, watching prosecutors stack her own music videos into evidence against her like firewood. The name on the paperwork read Amanda Lansford. The streets knew her as Buddha G. That night signaled an ending of something. It was the moment a career and a reputation cracked straight down the middle, and the two men knew each other. Buddha G is not a footnote in Chicago gang history. She is the first openly trans person and the first woman ever voted to run a set inside the Spanish Gangster Disciples, an organization that had been moving product and bearing its own for the better part of 40 years before she ever touched the crown. In a world that she herself calls one of the most homophobic places a person can stand, she turned out at 11, popped her first gun around 12, climbed a chain of command built to keep someone like her at the bottom, and got voted into leadership at 26. She built a rap name that outran the city limits. She fed the people under her better than anyone had ever fed her. And she wore a wire. Those two facts, the leader and the informant, are the whole tragedy of her, sitting side by side, refusing to let go of each other. The same loyalty that put a crown on her head is the loyalty she'd eventually be exiled for protecting. This is the story of how she got it, what she did with it, and what it cost her to keep breathing once it came off. To understand any of it, you have to understand the city she came up inside, because Chicago's gang world is dozens of maps stacked on top of each other, each one with its own borders, its own dead, its own decades-long grudges. The set Buddha G ran is one thread in something that goes back generations. Royals and Gaylords and Cobras, Latin Kings and Disciples, organizations that splintered and reformed and absorbed each other until the alliances stopped making sense even to the people inside them. She grew up watching the rules of that world get rewritten in real time, watching an older generation that ran on discipline give way to a younger one that ran on nothing she recognized. By the time she climbed to the top of her piece of it, she understood the machine better than most of the men who'd been handed it. And understanding it that well is exactly what let her take it apart. Palatine doesn't look like the Chicago you see in the headlines. It's a northwest suburb, tree-lined in stretches, a Walmart out on Rand Road, families pulling 9-to-5s and trying to keep their kids on the right side of the curb. The overall safety rating for the area sits at a B-, which is exactly the kind of grade that lies to your face, because the average it's built on flattens two completely different lives into one number. There's the Palatine of the nicer subdivisions, and there's the Palatine of the lower income housing projects, where the rent is subsidized, the corners are claimed, and a kid who grows up inside them inherits a hood the way other kids inherit a last name. That second Palatine had its own war running. You had the Baldwin Latin Kings, the Grand and Grove Four Corner Hustlers, and the Silver Lake Spanish Gangster Disciples, and they spent years beefing with each other across complexes that residents described as living inside a war zone. The bodies came in waves. 6 years before Buddha G ran anything, Palatine sat through the deadliest gang stretch the suburb had ever seen, a season where the police couldn't keep pace and somebody was dropping almost every single week. And it kept happening for years after. Two teens, Eduardo Alpizar and Uriel Garcia, were found shot to death at the Baldwin Green apartments on a Friday night. Both gone before the morning, both believed to have been targeted. Outside a Walmart packed with evening shoppers, gunfire opened up near the entrance and left evidence markers and clothing scattered across the parking lot. A neighbor summed up the whole feeling in one line: nowadays, you're not safe anywhere anymore. This is the air Buddha G learned to breathe. And as ugly as the streets got, the house she came home to was worse. Before the face tattoos, before any of the names she'd carry, she was a kid named Amanda, mixed white and Latino, living in a home the system kept circling back to. The DCFS visits were regular. The reason was simple. By her own account, the house was a place of beatings and starvation. When a camera finally asked her years later what her childhood was like, she answered with a single word: horrible, beat, starved, and worse. There was foster care in the mix, There was a father she would come to hate with a completeness that organized the rest of her life, out on the block, surrounded by trappers and drillers and the steady hum of fast money and faster violence. A kid in that situation runs the numbers quick. The streets were dangerous. The streets were also safer than the dining room, so she stepped off the porch young and never really stepped back on. The gang she stepped into was chosen for a reason, and the choice carries the entire logic of her childhood inside it. Her father had been an old-school royal, a member of a once all-Italian crew that loosened over the years to bring in Puerto Ricans. The royals' biggest enemies were the Spanish gangster disciples, so a kid who hated her father went looking for family and walked straight to his rivals. "My pops is an old-school royal, and I hated that," she said later, "so I went straight to his op and turned out." It was revenge before she had a word for it, and it was the only family structure anyone was offering. It also helped that she was already locked in with a few of them, most of all her best friend, young SGD she ran the streets with, a kid she only ever refers to now as G-Baby. Rest in peace. There was a geography to all of this that she learned the way kids in those neighborhoods learn it, by which blocks could get you killed. She came up on the north side where everything down south was, in her words, none of your business, where you didn't talk to people from over there and you didn't go near Little Village unless you were getting locked up, because the county jail sits right inside it. The crews her father ran with carried a streak she wanted no part of. She describes the gay lords and the older royals as hella racist, the kind who'd never have let her in with Hispanic blood in her veins, even as the royals themselves slowly opened their doors to Puerto Ricans and eventually black members. She chose the side that would have her, the side that hated the man who'd starved and beaten her. The borders of her loyalty were drawn before she was old enough to question them. She turned out SGD at 11 years old. Around 12, she popped her first gun, pulled the trigger, by her own description, but didn't drop anybody, didn't catch what the streets call a hat, a child who didn't fully grasp the weight of the thing bucking in her hands. From the jump, she was at war. There was no easing in, no probationary period of just hanging around. "I was at war from the start," she'd say, and she meant the words literally. The world she turned out into ran on a code that was already starting to crack by the time she inherited it. The Spanish gangs of her era carried a discipline that the rest of the city's crews didn't. Rules, regulations, a structure that members broke at the cost of a head-to-toe beating, an organization she describes as far more organized and disciplined than what came after it. That was the culture she was raised to respect, the version where the laws meant something and the punishment for ignoring them was swift and physical. She'd watch it dissolve over the years into a generation that, in her words, should just stop gangbanging altogether. Kids who turned on each other over labels, who'd flip allegiances overnight, who couldn't tell you what they were actually fighting for. She came up old school in a world that was busy forgetting how to be old school, and that gap between the discipline she learned and the chaos she inherited shaped the kind of leader she'd eventually become. She had a head for money early too, and a hustle that ran parallel to the gang without ever really belonging to it. By high school, she was buying weed cartridges for around $5 a piece, handing them off to her shorties and watching them flip the same carts for 50 or 60. Her people were popular, the product moved, and the money came back in stacks, by her telling something like $5 grand a week. The way she saw the territory, Palatine was hers, and whatever she did to eat inside that hood was strictly between her and her hood, no matter what the wider organization had going on. The chief instinct was there before she ever had the title. There was a tenderness underneath the violence too, the part of her that the people who actually know her keep insisting on. She's described as someone who'd give you the literal shirt off her back, the life of the party, loyal to the bone, the kind of person you'd want standing next to you if there was ever beef. The same kid who'd been beaten and starved at home grew into someone who couldn't stop taking other people in, feeding them, employing them, raising a foster son years later. The streets gave her a family she'd never had, and once she had it, she defended it past the point of reason. That instinct is the engine of everything that follows, the best and the worst of her running off the same fuel. The first real fracture came when she was 14, going on 15. She got kicked out, couldn't stay in the city anymore, and ended up shipped out to Elgin to live with an OG. The folks from the city handed her instructions. Link up with the Elgin SGDs, they'll take care of you. She was a shorty, and she was a female in a structure run by grown men, so a lot of them never took her seriously. Plenty of them were ready to send her off entirely. She was a hothead. She locked in anyway with a guy out there, a guy who slept on her couch, ate her food, ran with her like blood. Then the two of them fell off, and the man who used to sleep on her couch came to her with an offer. He had pipes for sale, guns. She was 15, broke, hungry for status, thirsty to prove herself, and she said yes without thinking twice. He told her to meet him in the parking lot of the Elgin Library. He climbed into her car and tossed her a bag, not a duffel, a Home Depot bag. And before she could even look inside it, she'd already handed him $300. He was gone. She pulled out of the lot. Elgin PD swarmed the car, something like 20 of them by her count. They booked her, and because there was no guardian willing to come claim a kid in a cell, no parent, no family, she sat. She stayed locked up from 15 until she was 19. 4 years. For a gun handed to her in a setup at an age when most kids are studying for a learner's permit. Think about what 4 years does to a person at that age. She went in a 15-year-old and came out a grown woman, the back half of her childhood spent inside, watching the calendar from a cell because the one thing the law required, a guardian to sign for a minor, was the one thing nobody in her life would provide. No parent showed, no family claimed her. The system that had circled her house for years left her sitting until she aged out of being a kid at all. And the whole time, she knew precisely whose word had put her there. The animosity didn't fade across those 4 years. It cured, hardened into something with a shape and a name and an address. She did the entire stretch carrying one thought like a stone in her pocket. She knew the name, she knew it was personal, and she promised herself that the day she touched back down, the gang she'd bled for would handle it. That belief, that her people had her back the way she had theirs, is the exact thing that would eventually break. And when it broke, it would pull everything else down with it. She came home at 19 and went straight to the gang to collect on a debt the streets are supposed to honor. She'd been set up. She had a name. She wanted the green light to handle it. The answer she got back was her first hard lesson in where she actually stood. The folks told her she could take an ass whooping for pointing a finger at a member without paperwork to back it, or she could shut up and live with it, because it was his word against hers. And she was a female, and she was a shorty, so the math came out the way it always had. She stopped messing with the Elgin set entirely and started moving on her own. Moving on her own got her locked up again at 22, this time for unlawful communication with a witness. She came home at 24 and found the original hood she'd grown up in had been shut down. The gang gave her a choice, transfer out or take her outs. The beating you absorb on the way out the door. They offered 2 landing spots. One was Drake and Ainsley. The other was Palatine, where her little brothers were already posted. She picked Palatine. That move dropped her into a hood with a chain of command already set, and by a brutal coincidence it slotted her directly beneath the man she blamed for her own 4-year bid. The set's first seat, the rung above her new second seat position, belonged to the same person tied to her old case. She kept her hands down and went to work. She had a job with a cleaning company, and she started scooping up the shorties, handing them side jobs, putting real cash in their pockets, and keeping them off the corners and out of cells. She fed people. She kept her brothers out of the worst of it, and the hood took notice of who was actually carrying the block. In 2016, the local members called a vote. They voted out the man holding first seat, a guy called Smiley, and they voted Buddha G in as their chief. She was 28, going on 29. With that single show of hands, she became the first female and the first openly trans person ever to run a set in Chicago SGD history. She put it without flinching when an interviewer asked if she thought she was the first. "I'm the only one in the history of Chicago." Anything that moved in Palatine now ran through her first. To understand what she'd inherited, you have to understand the machine she was now sitting on top of, because the Spanish Gangster disciples were never a loose pack of kids freelancing on corners. The organization traces back to the late 70s, when the gang landscape on the south side was tearing itself apart and new crews rose out of the wreckage of the old ones. Around 1980, after getting out of prison, a figure known as Shaky helped stand up what was first called Spanish Growth and Development, SGD, which hardened over time into the Spanish Gangster disciples. He ran it like a military, the big dog over every chapter, the man who had to sign off on everything the organization touched. In 1981, he gave a former Latin scorpion named Rudy Rios permission to carry the SGDs into the South Side, and that's the seed the whole thing grew from. They took the Star of David from the original Gangster disciples and made it their own, adding devil horns and the numbers 1, 9, 7, and 4, the 19th, 7th, and 4th letters of the alphabet, spelling out SGD. Their colors were baby blue and black. The Palatine version Buddha G ran kept that structure tight. She oversaw around 20 people. There were organized meetings. She called them hunnas, where the set would link up over spaghetti and pizza and go over how they were eating and how the block was running. There was a treasury called the Caja, a kind of street life insurance pool, and on her block everybody paid $30 a week into it. If a member got shot, the Caja buried him. Missed your dues, and you got put on the wall. You stood there and took it while somebody bigger swung on you. Initiation ran the same way. Her own had lasted exactly 2 minutes, a beating she frames as a way to show how tough you are. Break the laws and the price was a head to toe, a full body stomping, the discipline that made the Spanish gangs run tighter and colder than most of what surrounded them. That was the world she controlled, and when she explains what made her good at it, she keeps circling the same idea. A true leader, she said, is somebody that will get in front of you and show you what to do, not go tell you to go do something stupid. Her people weren't getting sent off to die for nothing. They were eating. The man who grew up a few doors down and got pulled in under her wing said it even simpler. Anything Buddha had, they had. That's the loyalty that voted her in. It's also the loyalty that would make her fall land for the people around her, like a death in the family. What that vote actually represented is hard to overstate. The hood is, by her own description, one of the most homophobic places a person can stand. An environment where you almost never hear about a gang member openly part of the LGBTQ community, and where a trans gang member is rarer still. She was carrying every disadvantage that world could hand a person at once. A female in an organization run by and for men, openly transitioning in a culture built on a narrow idea of toughness, picked on and underestimated at every level she'd climbed through. The hardest thing she ever had to be, she'll tell you, was herself, in the hood, period. And 20 grown people voted to follow her anyway. They didn't do it out of charity. They did it because she'd proven, block by block and job by job, that she'd keep them fed and keep them free in a place that promised neither. The violence never paused for the ceremony. In May of 2017, on a Friday afternoon at Palatine High School, 5 students with ties to the Latin Kings ditched class to go smoke and bumped into rivals on the walk. One of the kids whipped out a gun and made a decision he couldn't take back. 2 people were hit. Leg shots, both stabilized at the hospital, and a teenager named Diego Garcia Cordo was arrested and charged as an adult for attempted murder. The streets Buddha G now answered for were getting younger and hotter at the same time. Right around the crown, the chaos started turning into something else. A sound. Buddha G could rap, and she had exactly the kind of life the genre runs on. She dropped a track called Green Limb that pulled past 82,000 views. She got back in the booth and came out with Cuda, which climbed past 188,000. Then she linked with GMEBE bands, a white kid who grew up in the hood and joined an all-black street gang, the second strangest figure in the city standing right next to her. And the 2 of them, a trans SGD chief and a white gang member from opposite worlds, made a song called Work that crossed 500,000. Then she dropped Slide, and Slide broke past 2.6 million views and carried her name into rooms the streets couldn't reach on their own. The trouble with getting that big in Chicago is that it makes you a target you can't shrink back down. The city's history is stacked with artists gunned down at the exact moment they were about to make it out. FBG Duck, shot dead in broad daylight on Oak Street near the Dolce & Gabbana store. 4 gunmen out of 2 cars firing from a few feet away while shoppers ran for cover and bullet casings littered one of the most expensive shopping blocks in the city. The pattern barely changes. A rapper in Chicago who gets big enough is staring down 2 destinations, and the streets say it plainly, either dead or in jail. The lucky ones who dodge the bullet usually find their own pass waiting to catch up with them. A murder case or a gun charge surfacing right as the career takes off. Buddha G knew the equation cold. The bigger the name, the bigger the bullseye between your shoulders. She figured she could be the 1 in 100 who threads it, the Dirk who makes it out with the target on her back growing by the day. She decided the risk was worth it. She'd been gambling for years anyway. Her first felony came back in 2011 for threatening and intimidating a witness. In 2012, it was retail theft and stalking. In April of 2016, the same year she got her crown, police got calls about a vicious gang fight tearing apart a restaurant, ugly enough that civilians were sure it would turn deadly. A BMW peeled off when officers rolled up. A high-speed chase followed, and when it ended, the suspect bailed on foot and tossed a loaded gun. Buddha G got arrested alongside her right-hand man, a rapper called Kool-Aid Kid. The whole thing traced back to an escalating war with a crew called Trench Mob. who had links to the Four Corner hustlers the SGDs had been feuding with for years. That beef had curdled into something personal. Buddha G and her people started showing up to Trench Mob's own concerts and shutting them down, popping up uninvited, killing the energy in the room until the show just stopped. They describe it afterward with something close to pride, the satisfaction of watching a rival crew freeze mid-set the second they walked in. They were hitting a rap operation where it actually bleeds in the bottom line, choking off the shows and the buzz a rival needed to eat. By the time of the restaurant fight, the war had gone on site. No more trading shots and songs, no more shutting down events, just the threat of it turning deadly any night either side caught the other slipping. The loaded gun in that chase was a snapshot of where the whole thing was heading. She was winning on every front she cared about. The block, the booth, the streets, the name. And that is almost always the precise moment the floor decides to give out, which carries the story back to the Motel 6. September 22nd, 2018. Buddha G and a few of her people were posted outside that rundown motel, blowing tree, when she clocked one of her ops creeping around the corner. Here's how that night ran. Words got thrown. The two rivals flashed signs and talked smack on their way up to their room, came back down still running their mouths, and Buddha G was done with the lip boxing. She grabbed a semi-automatic out of the black Acura and started dumping. One man went down with a round in the elbow and a round in the chest that punctured his lung. The Acura rolled off. She was arrested not long after. That chest shot is the detail prosecutors built their entire case around, because a chest shot is a kill shot that missed by inches. It put what could have been a first-degree murder one ricochet away from happening, and the state moved to bury her under the whole weight of it. They held her on a $1.25 million bond. They lined up her music videos, full of straps and gang signs, to walk a jury through a woman who lived every word she rapped. They pointed at the tattoo on her arm that read "Death unto our enemies." And here sits the coldest twist in the file. The op she'd shot at outside that motel turned out to be an ex-member of her own Spanish gangster disciple set, a man who'd left. Internal blood, the kind of body these organizations manufacture more of, over private grudges, than any rival ever does. She made it harder on herself at every turn. Her original bond had been a flat million, and her own courtroom outburst pushed the judge to tack on the extra $250,000. By her own description, she was her own worst enemy, sitting at the high point of her career, name buzzing, future finally cracking open, and she kept driving the shovel deeper from the inside. The case dragged on for years. She was held on a gang-related attempted homicide that could have eaten most of her life. She was locked up from February 17th, 2021 until April 8th, 2024, and she caught a parole that keeps her on paper until 2027, which means one wrong move sends her straight back through the gate. That should have been the whole arc. Talented kid from a broken house climbs the ranks, flies too close, comes down, but the real detonation hadn't gone off yet, and it didn't come from a gun. It came from a recording. Audio started leaking. In it, you can hear Buddha G, the chief, the one voted in, the one who ran the Kaha and fed her shorties, quietly recording her own people while buying guns off them for the police. On one tape, she's working a member who has no idea the person across from him is being captured for a case, steering the talk toward hardware while he speaks freely, candid, never once suspecting a wire. On the same kind of recording, one of the men being set up actually pauses mid-deal to praise another member for keeping his mouth shut under pressure, a man complimenting somebody for refusing to snitch, on tape, while the chief he trusts snitches on him in real time. A second recording is colder and more procedural, a controlled call dated July 20th, an official report number, and the names of two detectives read into the open. The consenting party logged as Amanda Lansford, a weapons investigation spelled out at the top. Her voice on that one is tighter, more nervous, like there's somebody sitting beside her, feeding her lines, and the man on the other end starts to feel it. He asks for a trade instead of a straight sale, testing her, because a real seller will trade, and a cop legally can't put a gun back into circulation that might turn up in a crime. You can hear him deciding, in real time, whether the friend on the line has quietly turned into something else. For the people who loved her, this was the unthinkable. These were her closest friends. Bonds built going through hell together, the family by fire the gang was always supposed to be. The audio said that family had been compromised from somewhere near the very top. The hurt landed harder than the anger. Then Buddha G did the one thing no one saw coming. She got on social media and explained exactly why she'd worn the wire. Her version reaches all the way back to Elgin, to the 15-year-old who did 4 years for a gun she was handed in a setup. The man who set her up, she says, was a figure from her own world named Lavelle Franklin. The same guy the streets called Lefty, an original out of Elgin who'd slept on her couch and eaten her food before he sold her to the police. She'd come home at 19, wanting the gang to handle it, and they'd told her to sit down because she was a female with no paperwork. Years later, she says, an attorney's office finally put the proof in her hands. Old juvenile records with the man's name on them, in black and white, confirming what she'd carried since she was a teenager. The moment triggered her so hard, her ex pulled out a phone to photograph the page, and the attorney snatched the paperwork back and asked them to leave. She tried to do it right one more time. She called in every SGD she knew with any juice and laid it out plain. Either you handle this or I will. I'ma smoke his ass, she told them. The answer came back the way it always had. They told her if she touched him, they'd come for her. And not only her, but her girlfriend, who had nothing to do with any of it, and the foster son the two of them were raising. When an interviewer later asked why her own people wouldn't believe her, she answered in 3 words, because I'm a female. So she made her choice. I'm setting his ass up, she said. She got a body cam, got in a car with the man who'd taken 4 years of her life, bought a gun off him, and handed him to the same system he'd handed her to as a teenager. By her account, when his charge came down, the state waived it, and he did no time at all, which means she burned her own name to the ground in the streets for a man who walked free, while her reputation never came back. My life is fucked for me being spiteful, she said, and he's fine. The streets have a word for what she did, and they don't carve out exceptions for the reason. To them, paperwork is paperwork. The streets own currency for revealing who told, the one piece of paper that can erase a man no matter what he's done. The thing that turned names like Tekashi 69 and Gona into cautionary tales, but the people closest to her drew a line around her anyway. I don't look at her as a rat, one of her crew said. All she did was get back. That's that Gemini in her. They knew the whole story. The female in a male organization, the years of being picked on and pushed down, the betrayal that lit the fuse before she ever touched a wire. The way they tell it, if you really know Buddha, she's one of the most loyal people you'll ever meet, and she believes in nothing for nothing. She'd been backdoored first. She finally got even with the only weapon a person without power holds against someone the government is protecting. The cost of that arrived fast. A code of silence is the load-bearing wall of any criminal organization, because a single informant carries enough weight to bring the whole house down. The same lesson the RICO cases taught the Italian mobs across the 80s and 90s, when one cooperator at a time pulled entire families apart. The Spanish gangster disciples weren't going to absorb a chief who'd worn a body cam, no matter the backstory. She got exiled from the only family she'd ever claimed, and then she did the most Buddha G thing imaginable. She built a new one. She pulled a renegade crew together out of the discarded and the excommunicated. Some BDs, some Milwaukee Kings, some maniacs, and a handful of ex-SGDs who'd been pushed out the way she had. One of the closest is Lefty himself, a different Lefty, a maniac Latin disciple who earned the name as a kid after a bullet wrecked his left lung at 15. A man stabbed and shot at, who came home from his own prison stretch saying his whole plan now is to take care of his girl and his stepson and to make Buddha proud. Every time the streets knocked her down, she stood back up running something. By the time the fame caught up to her, she'd become a figure other gangbangers couldn't even place. There's a story from a Chicago rapper tied to FBG's circle who ran into her on a plane coming back from LA and didn't understand what he was looking at. He thought he'd gotten into it with some Mexican gang member, kept staring, trying to square the jacket and the blue eyes, lost as to who or what was talking to him. We never hear about y'all beefing with Mexican gangs, he told a podcast afterward, still rattled. That's not a thing. He'd brushed up against the single rarest figure in the entire city and walked away unable to describe her. That's the kind of strange, specific fame she'd built, large enough to confront a rapper at 30,000 feet, rare enough that nobody had a box to put her in. Where she sits now is quieter than any of it. She's been spotted working a regular job at a gas station, promoting her music on the side, trying to build something legal out of a story the internet can't stop watching. In the comments under a video about her, a Chicago local described running into her at his gas station more than once, and when she clocked his stunt bike parked outside, she tried to hire him for a music video. She sat down with the blogger Tommy G for an interview that crossed 1 million views and walked him through all of it. The abuse, The transition she started 6 or 7 years back, the testosterone she says gives her more energy than she's ever had, the claim that she's the only transitioning gangbanger out there. A claim that holds because there isn't anyone else quite like her to measure against. She's still on paper until 2027. The neighborhood she came up in still has people who'd like to see her gone, and the ops she made across 20-odd years didn't expire when she changed her life. She knows all of it. "I'm a dead man walking," she told Tommy G, standing in a cemetery she'd picked on purpose. "They say I'm a snitch out here." When he asked for any final thoughts, she didn't reach for sympathy. "I'm not what social media says I am," she said, and added that she really doesn't care what any of them think. Then, worn down, she said the part that lingers, that if the people promising to kill her online actually meant it, they could go ahead and do it already because she was tired of living inside the unknown. That's where the weight settles. Buddha G came out of a house that starved her and a suburb that handed her a war in place of a future. She got told her whole life that someone like her couldn't lead, and she got voted in anyway. She fed the people under her better than anyone had ever fed her, and the same loyalty that built her became the exact thing she was punished for protecting. The day she decided that 19 years of being told to sit down and take it was 19 years too many. Even she started asking what any of it was for. Older now, she circles back to the early days and the wars over blocks and flags and finds she can't reconstruct the reason. The money she made with her shorties never had anything to do with the hood she bled for. And the realest people she ever knew are sitting in cells or lying under the ground she stood on for that interview. She's at a crossroads, and she can see exactly where each road runs. One leads back into the streets, into get back and ops in a cell or a casket waiting at the end. The other leads out of Chicago entirely, toward the rap money, and the second life a story like hers could genuinely build. The kid who hated her father is gone. The chief who ran Palatine is gone. What's left is somebody standing in a graveyard in her 30s, asking out loud why she's still breathing, admitting she hasn't figured it out yet, only that whatever the reason is, she hasn't gotten to it. The crown came off a long time ago. What she does without it is the only part of this story still being written.